Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and the last segment of the Battle of Chickamauga covered what happened in the Vineyard Field, starting at around 3 p.m. during the Confederate breakthrough on September 19th. Now we will look at what was happening to the north of the Confederate breakthrough during that same time. When Major General John Bell Hood's corps moved forward and broke through the Union line, Evander Law's division and part of Bushrod Johnson's division engaged the divisions of Jefferson C. Davis, Thomas J. Wood, and Philip Sheridan. To the north, the rest of Johnson's division, along with Alexander P. Stewart's division, smashed into the Union line. Johnson's division swung around the flank of King, Beatty, and Dick's brigades, while Bates' brigade moved against Gross's brigade. Behind the Union line, Major General Joseph Reynolds, whose brigades had been plucked from his division and placed at different locations, possessed only the 6th Ohio and 92nd Illinois, and he had only gotten those by picking them up as they came to the rear for ammunition, as in the case with the 6th. He also had assembled 16 artillery pieces perched on a rise in the Brotherton field. When the Union line broke under the pressure of the Confederate assault, many regiments either partially or wholly rallied around those guns. Had Brown's brigade pushed forward instead of falling back because he thought he was unsupported, the Union line may have been lost. Reynolds remembered the moment by saying, "I remember seeing Van Cleve telling the boys to go slow, trying to stop his men. They were being driven, but I could not see who was driving them. They were not firing but were going to the northward in the rear of my line." For King's brigade, it was a complete rout, and the situation was turning deadly for the entire Union Army if the attack could not be thwarted. Horatio Van Cleve rode north to find troops to stop the rebels. He came across Brigadier General William B. Hazen's brigade and began bringing them south. In the Brotherton field, the situation was getting worse for the Union. Clayton and Fulton's brigades pushed forward, threatening the flank of the 92nd Illinois, who retreated back to their mounts. This created a chain reaction. With their flanks unsupported, each regiment gave way as the Confederate troops moved through the Brotherton field. Only Hazen's brigade was able to hold on to the ground. Just to the east, Colonel Gross's brigade was about to be hit by a large Confederate attack, and even worse, they were running low on ammunition. The 6th Ohio had already ran low and went to the Lafayette Road to refill their cartridge boxes. When Bates' brigade approached Gross's line, the musketry raged between the two sides as the Union troops desperately held on. Gross moved the 36th Indiana from a supportive role to the front line to help alleviate the pressure on the other regiments. However, it was to no avail. The Confederates were just too numerous, and the breakthrough at the Brotherton field forced Gross to pull his men back in order to save his battle line. The Union center was shattered. The success of the Confederate brigades caused a great confusion on the battlefield, though. A lack of communication between the brigade commanders made each leader afraid they had pushed too far without support, and some were fighting alongside units they were not supposed to be fighting with. Sheffield's brigade was a mess, and its deteriorating situation only added to the growing confusion within the Confederate ranks. The bulk of Sheffield's Alabama brigade arrived in Brotherton field. These regiments were supposed to be fighting alongside Benning and Robertson's brigades, which were engaged a mile south around the Vineyard field, but had failed to keep that connection, drifting to the northwest instead. When an artillery round unhorsed Sheffield early in the advance, command should have went to Colonel Perry of the 44th Alabama, but that regiment had gotten disconnected from the brigade and was fighting with Stewart's division. Colonel William C. Oates ultimately took command of the bulk of those troops, leading them into Brotherton field. When Colonel Charles Harker's Union brigade advanced from the south in an attempt to throw back Confederate forces west of the Lafayette Road, the disorganized rebels were taken by surprise. Brigadier General John Gregg was wounded by a 64th Ohio skirmisher and left for dead, but the Southern general would recover from his wounds. As the Union soldiers passed by, they relieved him of many articles, including his sword. With Federal soldiers in their rear, this convinced the two regiments under Gregg to fall back across the road, and Fulton began to turn his regiments toward the south to address the growing problem in that sector. To the north, Bates' successful brigade continued its push to the northwest, chasing routed Federal batteries. 3 Union batteries and the 75th Indiana sat at the edge of Poe Field, awaiting the Confederate regiments to appear through the tree line. When the gray lines emerged, a destructive fire of artillery and musketry encompassed the field. A member of Bates' brigade recalled that some regiments were almost annihilated. The artillery knocked a hole so large in the 37th Georgia that it split into 2 units, one headed to the left and one headed to the right. Bates' men couldn't handle the hail of iron and lead and withdrew back into the woods, close to the Brotherton Road. Brigadier General John B. Turchin, a Russian immigrant who had served in the Imperial Russian Army before coming to the United States and settling in Chicago, was a tough fighter, and since there was silence in his front, he deployed to the west and attacked the right flank of the Confederate breakthrough. However, Turchin's men did not pursue the enemy. They withdrew to their stable battle line. While all this was going on, Rosecrans and Thomas were attempting to shore up the breakthrough. Brannan's brigades were approaching from the north, and Negley's fresh division was deploying just to the west of the Lafayette Road in the Brotherton Field. A soldier from that division remembered, "The battle was raging fiercely in the forest along the Chickamauga. Batteries of artillery and brigades of infantry were moving on double quick to the support of our forces on the battle lines. We could see the smoke of battle rising above the trees, almost shutting out our view of the forest, while the roar of artillery and rattle of musketry was deafening." Negley sent his 2 brigades west and sent back the rebels under Clayton. They were the only ones still holding a position west of the Lafayette Road. It was about 6 p.m., and the rebel threats in Vineyard Field to the south had been contained, and the breakthrough at the Brotherton Field was thrown back. Both sides came to rest near the place they had ended their fight. Rosecrans had mostly reacted to Confederate attacks the entire day, and as a result, the chain of command was disorganized, with only George Thomas commanding a coherent organization of troops on the north end of the field. Braxton Bragg had committed a lot of divisions into the fight, but he still had some that had yet to fire a shot in the battle. Patrick Cleburne's division had just arrived on the field, as well as Thomas Hindman's division. Before night completely covered the battlefield, Confederate forces would launch one more attack.